That's it for tonight. So Baruch Bashan, he mentioned it, the first that I remember is he mentioned it at a conference, probably late 70s. And he talked about what it meant and the Hebrew origins of that. And I think he also mentioned Baruch Hashem, which has a slightly different meaning that I'm not remembering right now. But Baruch Bashan meant the blessings already are. So we started the Arrowhead retreats, I think in 74, maybe 75. And JR wanted an experience for people that would be really based in spirit, but also based in Dharma or in service. And so it was a mix of the seminars and the meditations and the calling in the light and working with that, and then the work parties and the improvements. We built those trails. JR would take us on, he would lead the way, and there were no trails at the property at all. So he would lead the way, and we'd all follow with the shovels and just dig the trails as he walked along. It was fantastic. And lots of work parties. We did, renovations and improvements to the sanctuary. The sanctuary was just a garage to begin with. It had a fireplace absolutely in the middle that had to be beaten out of there at one time. But the Tai Chi, I don't know whether that was, probably wasn't the first summer, but it was probably in the first couple of summers. And there was a movement that was called Tai Chi Chu. Tai Chi has 108 movements, I think, or 106, and it's fairly complex and it takes a long time to learn. Tai Chi Chu has about 8 movements, so he asked me to learn that so that I could do that at the retreats. And it was about energy, it was about moving energy. He's always talked about how movement helps people organize their energy, and spiritually that's a good thing. That when we organize our energies and our energies aren't all scattered around, we have more capacity to receive spirit and move it and do something with it. So that was that. And it was just, it was nice because we had recreation times. We had the volleyball court up there, so we played volleyball big time, and then we'd have the movement, and then we had the walking meditations, and then we'd have the Dharma, and great food, and seminars and meditations. So it was fun. We do weekend retreats all summer, 10 weekends up there. It was great. It was a great time. And the swing, yes, that was a big recreation. The swing that swung out over the hill. And the guys, you've seen pictures, the guys would pull that swing up the hill way high and then let it go. It was quite a ride. Quite a ride. I don't have that many stories of when he was a kid. One of my favorite little snippets was when it was at his father's funeral, and I was talking to one of his aunts, and she was asking me what he was doing now, and I was trying to explain something about MSIA and the whole spiritual journey. And she said, "Roger always was a clever boy." And I just thought it was so cute. And he tells the story at that time, because he was saying at that time, "I'll never come back to Utah. This is it. I'll never come back to Utah again. I'm done here. I'm gone." And he tells the story of his aunt, and I think it was the same aunt, saying to him, don't say never. Don't say never. And I've really thought about that through the years, because he's gone back to Utah a lot. And in many ways, he's much closer to, the family in that time of his life than he was when I first knew him. When I first knew him, he was really, I'm kind of done with Utah, except for the folks. Yeah. I did spend a lot of time with his sister.
Helen? The one that died of cancer?
Linda.
Linda.
Linda, the young one. She was a volunteer for me in the office.
Oh, tell us about that.
Yeah, she was just they lived down here for quite a while, and she used to come and help me collate pieces of paper and stuff envelopes and get things ready. She was cool. When we moved to Prana in '74, I had lived by myself for most of my adult years, and it never occurred to me that I would be living in a house with 60, 80, 100 people, and it was pretty overwhelming. And I was kind of den mother, and it was just wild. There was just so much going on. It was the beginnings of so many things. It was the beginning of the bigger seminars. It was the beginning of all the video work. I don't think any of that had really existed in any big way before we were at Prana. And we did 2 seminars a week, every week. And there were 300 people anyway that would show up there. They were everywhere. So the rate of all the organizational things just went wild with Prana. And I think Arrowhead came right about the same time. It was all like right in that period of time. Working was pretty much nonstop, absolutely nonstop. I just, we were still, when we moved to Prana, we were producing on the mimeograph machines all of our written material. We had the discourses going out every month. We had the little booklets that were the beginning of the books. We had a little booklet on dreams. We had a little booklet on the lower self. We had a little booklet on, I don't know, there were dozens of them. Christ consciousness, the inner Christ, there were lots of them. We produced all of that stuff ourselves. There were just days and nights spent cranking the machines. We did all the mailings ourselves. We did the whole thing ourselves. And it was me and Candace and Jeannie Ford and a couple other people that were our stalwart, how was that? How do you cut that? There were a few volunteers, and we just worked nonstop. We just worked nonstop.
How was JR? Can you talk about how JR changed your life? Like what? If you could pick one, because I know it was a lot. If you could pick one, what was the biggest summit, the big one, the iceberg that everything else can't compare to, that changed your life?
Well, I think just coming to that realization, which I've talked about in other things, you know, that first time that he told me about the consciousness of the mystical traveler, and that consciousness had come to him and shown him this path of the work that he would be doing, and that was what he was committed to, and that was what he was going to be doing. And if I wanted to join him in doing that work, please. But if I didn't want to join him, that was fine. But that was huge, because something in me like recognized that there was so much more. It opened up a doorway that life wasn't just life. Life wasn't just like, here you are and you know, you get a job and you do good things, but that's kind of it. It opened up this door that life was a journey that I had never even imagined. And that was, you know, that was kind of that. And the other was the first seminar that I went to, which was my first taste of meditation. And I left my body consciously. I saw realms that I was not here, and I'd never had any idea that that was available and that was there. And it was an experience I could never, ever deny. It was for all time. At school, when we were teaching and I first knew him, he was Roger. And that was the name he was given as a child, so that was the name he had grown up with. But when he told me of the traveler consciousness, he said that when that consciousness came in, a new consciousness came in, which he called the John consciousness, and that then he combined the names. And so for years it was John, Roger, or JR at night at seminars, and it was Roger during the day at school. It took me a long time to transition completely over to John, Roger, and JR. But it was the spiritual. It was the John was the spiritual, Roger was the physical.
And talk about the RV trips.
As I understand it.
Talk about the RV trips. What does that mean? What was that all about?
Well, somewhere, I don't know, 75, 6, he bought an RV, and he bought it so he could travel around, basically around the U.S. and do work, plant light columns, do spiritual work. And the guys who were on staff would travel with him. It was the only trips I ever really wanted to go on, because they would go into the northwestern country that I love so much, the mountains and the Colorado, Wyoming, Montana. I don't know. I always wanted to go on those trips, but never happened.
Talk more about the RV. What was in it? What did it become?
So the RV originally, of course, was just an RV, and they traveled. They didn't travel in that for very long, I don't think. I think it was a year or two. It was kind of a fun thing, and then in, I don't know, 75, 76, when we were starting to get the video equipment and starting to video seminars. They needed a place for all the equipment, and they needed a little studio. And there wasn't any room at Prana, in the area of Prana that had the big seminar room. So they parked the RV right outside that back door and put all this. It became a sound studio. They put all the equipment in it. It was fully rigged, fully outfitted. It stayed there for years. It was the sound studio. So here's my take. I really don't think that this path of soul transcendence is for everyone. And I don't think it's an easy path. I think that when we get on this path and we're saying that we're going to clear and balance out our karmas, and we're going to really do the work of spirit, and we're going to lift higher, and we're going to be really committed to loving and to being in integrity with ourselves, I don't think that's easy to pull off in this world. And so I don't think it's for everyone. So I think people come and people go. And I think many people come for a while. They get a lot out of the teachings. The teachings, to me, are absolutely brilliant, and they hold up in any situation. But I think people sometimes hit a place where they don't want to go any further, just because of probably whatever their karmas are. And so they leave. People who leave, I have no problem with. I mean, in the controversy times, you know, many of people who were really, really close to me, who had been my volunteers, had worked with me, left. And as long as they didn't leave in negativity, I don't care. You know, it's like if a person is loving and a person is honest and clear, it's like it doesn't matter to me if they're in the movement or not in the movement. When people badmouth anybody, really, but JR, it's like that doesn't go down very well. And I did have, you know, some feelings over people that it seemed like he had loved so much and given so much to, and helped through crises and helped through difficult situations. And it's hard to see people turn against him. I mean, my mom, who didn't really believe much of anything of this spiritual path. And in the 80s, when a lot of stuff was in the newspapers, she said to me one day, "Please tell JR how sorry I am that people he's loved so much would do this." And I just thought that was kind of amazing. That was my mother. So, you know, it never rattled me inside of myself as far as, you know, my connection with JR, my connection with you know, the teachings of the traveler, because I know where that is, and I've known that for a long, long time, and it just doesn't change. Can we have
you tuck your hair behind your ear on the other side?
On the other side.
Yeah, right there. Much better. Thank you.
So, I'm trying to think of what the time frames might. So JR, from the very early days, he's always talked about not being attached to the organization, not being attached to really much of anything in terms of the world. And part of him, I think, has, from way back, was ready or willing or open to sharing those keys of the traveler consciousness. I don't think he's ever, he doesn't hang on to that kind of stuff. So at a conference, JR made an announcement that part of the spiritual energy, the mystical traveler consciousness, as I understand it, is a focal point for anchoring spirit into this level. It's a holding place. So others can do that, and others do that in varying degrees. So when JR says that he's passing the keys on or passing the mantle on to someone else, the way I understand it is that he or spirit, I don't know, is creating a channel through the other person to anchor part of that spiritual energy. So in 73 or 4 or 5, whatever it was, some of those abilities, I would suppose, were transferred to Michael. And then, probably within the next year or two, Michael fell in love, wanted to get married, and didn't choose to continue this path. So it all went back to JR. This is all as I understand it, heaven knows. And then a few years later, there was the same kind of transference to Edgar Fatia. And then Edgar, kind of the same thing, fell in love, wanted to get married, chose not to continue. So in whatever year it was, 78, that John?
88.
88, okay. So I think, yeah, so there might have been quite a space of time there. And then some of the keys were passed to John. And I've always considered that that's kind of been shared, JR and John. And JR has told us from way back that he also held the keys to the preceptor consciousness, which I don't know that any of us could explain that or tell you what it is, but my experience kind of is a way more powerful something, more powerful energy, more powerful loving, more juice. And it does seem to me that in recent years, JR has moved further into whatever that is. So early on, JR would talk not only about holding the consciousness of the mystical traveler, but also holding the consciousness of the preceptor. And I've asked him, people through the years have asked him, I've heard people ask him what that means, what that is. And he basically says it really defies description. It's outside of this universe. It's big, whatever it is. My experience of the last few years is, and I don't know this for sure, but my experience is that he has moved into a place of deeper loving, bigger loving, and a depth of his energy that I identify as a preceptor consciousness. One experience that I had a few years ago was I was in a very rough place in my life. And through the years, for all the years, it's like I've talked out everything with JR. I mean, every crisis in my life He's always been right there for me, and he's the one I go to, he's the one I talk to. And his loving has gotten me through tons of stuff. But this time, I was in a really rough place. I'd been crying and crying and crying for months over a particular situation, and I saw him, and I experienced him as much quieter than he used to be. So in that quiet, I don't like to jammer a lot of questions at him or a lot of my earthly concerns, but in this instance, I was really hurting. So he was silent, I was silent, and I just reached over and I put like my little finger kind of over the top of his little finger. And we just sat there in silence. And it felt like there was a direct transmission of energy. Energy like I had never really felt before at that level. And I could feel it tracing through my body. I could really feel it in my brain, and I could feel it in my heart, and I could feel it all the way through the body. And it felt like everything inside of me was being rearranged and reordered. And I felt like he was rewiring me. I felt like I was getting a whole new kind of electrical system in there. And after about 10 minutes of this, and I was just blown away, just kind of sitting there and experiencing all this energy. And he moved his hand about 1/8 of an inch away from me after about 10 minutes. And everything kind of settled down. And I looked over at him and I just said, "Thank you." And he just looked at me and just winked with this that little impish grin that he gets. And it's like, and there's been other moments like that. And one time I thanked him for what felt like a whole amazing inner work time, and he said, "Oh, I do it all the time." But that depth, I equate it with, you know, another thing that I love is we're all getting older. And he shows us the way in the most incredible way, because I see him continuing to grow in that spirit. And I see him continuing to change and to go to higher places or deeper places. And it gives me a reference point for how to get older. That's really glorious. That getting older doesn't have to be this wretched downturn, that it can be brilliant.
Go to India.
Go to India. So I never wanted to go to India, and it was one of the trips that I couldn't have cared less and actually didn't want to go. And then one day JR called me at the office and he said, "Have you been wanting to go to India?" And I said, "No." "Why?" And he said, "Because it showed up on the cosmic mirror." That's another subject. What is the cosmic mirror? I'm not sure, but it appears to be something that would allow one a little glimpse into the future, perhaps. But anyway, so he used to say that if things showed up 3 times on the cosmic mirror, they would be so. So he said, "You've shown up once on the cosmic mirror as going to India." So then he called me about 2 weeks later and he said, "So now are you daydreaming about going to India? Are you fantasizing about going to India?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Because it showed up a 2nd time. If it shows up a 3rd time, get your shots." So he called me about 2 weeks later and he said, "Get your shots. You're going to India." And I was like, why am I going to India? So anyway, off we went to India. We bought saris. We bought little sandals. It's, oh my God, what are we doing? India, for me, was a look at the juxtaposition between JR's teachings and the Indian teachings of spirit. There's a lot of the essence that I think is the same. There's a lot of the expression that is very, very different. One of the things that really was amazing to me in India was what I perceived as the passivity of people, of Sai Baba's devotees, of other people's devotees. We went to a lot of ashrams and saw a lot of gurus and a lot of groups
Jnana
and
yoga?
teachers. Jnana yoga, oh yes. Yes, jnana yoga. But what amazed me was the passivity. I mean, at Sai Baba's ashram, people would sit for days waiting for Sai Baba to come out. And I couldn't imagine it. I absolutely couldn't imagine it. I'm so active-oriented. I mean, I'm down there in the basement, I'm cranking out discourses, I'm editing booklets, I'm developing programs for the retreats. It's like I'm busy. I'm busy. I've always been busy. And to just sit was beyond me. And I don't know that it's as passive as it looked to me, but that was a big thing. And I realized that one of the differences hugely between meditation and SEs, spiritual exercises. JR has said that the meditation is more passive, the spiritual exercises are more active, and that's what I saw. It's like our path has much more action to it, and to me it has a lot more self-responsibility. People at the Indian ashrams, they ask for permission to come, permission to go, permission to do most anything. And it was like, wow, that's a whole different thing. JR says, you decide, you check it out, you decide, don't check your brains at the door, you decide, it's yours, it's your path. I love that. I love that. So,
can you explain what SEs are?
Spiritual exercises? It's doing something active, it's chanting a tone or repeating a mantra, and it's an active participation in observing and in awareness, so that it isn't just letting whatever happens, it's actively directing it and actively participating in it. It's very different, it's a very different quality inside for me. And India, I mean, I spent several years after we came home from India going, what was that about? Why was I there? And that's kind of what I came to, that was really important for me to know. India was just, it was amazing. It was difficult on many levels because of the poverty and the begging and just some of the sights that we saw. The crowdedness, the lack of personal space was astonishing. The level of phenomenon, the vibhuti that appears at one of the ashrams, I spent 4 hours staring at one part of a picture. I picked a guy's cheek and stared at that part of the picture for 4 hours to see if vibhuti would appear there, and it did. It's amazing. The phenomenon is amazing. There was another ashram that they put these little tiny, like fingernail-sized photographs of the guru in your hand, and it produced a kind of a syrup that they called amrit. I'm looking at it. It's in my hand. My hand is dry, and then my hand has amrit. So it's an amazing place, and obviously they're plugged in big time. But it certainly is not my path.
And lastly, is there one last story you want to tell, lastly, that comes to mind? And if that's the one that comes to mind, say it.
One last story I want to tell. I draw such a blank. I guess not. You want to prompt me?
Anything with you and JR at the beach? He's reading. I mean, I like those. You and Lee are Lee. Who's the other?
Lee Clausen.
Lee Clausen.
Mm.
Were the two that kind of would go out to the beach with JR.
Yeah, well, in the 60s, and early on when I first knew him, there wasn't an MSIA yet on this level. So we weren't into all of the work. We weren't doing all of that stuff. So we had lots of time to play. And we just roamed around the city. We'd go to movies. We'd go to the beach. We'd go for long drives. We'd drive to San Diego. We'd drive to Santa Barbara. You know, just whatever. We'd cruise bookstores. We'd hang out. It was just kind of It was kind of fabulous. And we talked and we talked and we talked. I've never talked that much to any human being before or since. We talked endlessly for hours about absolutely everything. Well, one of the beach stories was when I was reading Lord of the Rings, which one of my college professors had told me about that. And it hadn't been out that long either at that time. And JR had never heard of it. And I was at the most dramatic moment of the trilogy, and I couldn't put the book down, so we're at the beach, and I was just berating myself inside for being rude by continuing to read when I was with my friend, and but I couldn't put the book down. And when I finally did put the book down, he had fallen asleep on the beach, and so I thought, you're being so rude. But I thought I would go for a swim just to kind of break the energy. So I go out into the water and I go for a swim and I come back and he's reading the book. And he didn't put it down. He didn't put it down. He read for the rest of the day. So that was pretty funny. But we just, yeah, it was, he was so eclectic in those days. I mean, we went to seances and channeling and billet reading and just all sorts of stuff. I'd never seen or heard any of it. And what I loved was he always talked about what he observed, what his awarenesses were. Because I had these snap judgments. I mean, I would just go, oh, that's got to be bullshit. That's just got to be bullshit. Which sounds a lot like my parents. But he would say why it was or it wasn't, because sometimes it was and sometimes it wasn't. And he would explain what he was seeing and what he was sensing, so it taught me an awful lot.
He came and went quickly.
Okay, well, John Eversole, who was married to the lady that's now called Saivani. I can't remember what maybe she was Saivani then. So John had this vision that these domes, and they were made out of some kind of foam, artificial material, foam, and they were huge. And his vision was that this would be cheap housing for the world. This would be a way to house people all over the world very cheaply. They would be indestructible. They would never fall apart. And he wanted that. He wanted to produce them. He wanted to make them, and he wanted it to be worldwide. And J.R. was really on board. He was really, really on board for a long, long time. And John lived at Prana. John and Saivani lived at Prana. They built a dome at Mandeville, and there was another dome in the city someplace. I've forgotten where. And but it never really flew. You know, it just never really. It never really got going. But the dome, it was just, we took a chainsaw to it eventually, the one that was at Mandeville, and we took it in pieces and we moved it to Arrowhead, and we put it in the amphitheater, which meant that we could no longer use the amphitheater as an amphitheater. And then about, I don't know, 10 years later, when it was really starting to crumble, we just kind of kicked it apart because it was really coming down anyway. And we took it to the dump, and it was indestructible. It was completely non-biodegradable, and I didn't think the dump would really take it because of its construction. So I dressed as girly as I could, and I said to when the guy said, "What is this?" I went, "I don't know." And he said, "Yeah, but what's it made of?" I said, I don't know. It's been around for a long time. I don't really know what it is until they took it.
Well, that's a wrap. Thank you so much, Pauli.